Well, hello and welcome back to Midweek Mashup. Today I'm sitting down with Pastor Eric in our new kind of setup.
Yeah, it's cozy. I like it.
We switched spots. Now I'm sitting on this side and you're sitting on that side.
Yeah, I'm sitting on the space couch that has charging ports for phones and devices. I'm pretty excited about it.
It's really cool. So more changes to come, which is exciting.
Yeah.
But so we are continuing our Names of God series. And this last Sunday we talked about the name Yahweh Shalom, which means the Lord is peace.
Yes.
There's some interesting perspectives shared on Sunday about Christian nonviolence and C.S. Lewis, war is necessary.
Yeah.
I had, as I was watching back, a couple of questions come to mind based off of some of the things that we see in our church online outreach sort of stuff. If God is a God of peace and love, then how do you explain all of the violence of the Old Testament? A God who demands blood sacrifices and genocide of different people groups. And then also, the two-part question, how do we justify the Crusades of Christianity, which are a very violent spreading of Christianity?
Yeah, the first question is a really tricky one. Because, for the entire history of the church, that people have been wrestling with how do we have these stories in the Old Testament of conquest that is seemingly ordained by God, and then we have the character of God most fully revealed in Jesus, which is what the New Testament tells us, who seems to be completely different from that. The short answer, I would say, and I don't say it to avoid controversy. I think some people won't like this answer either. But the short answer is to say the New Testament talks about a new covenant. It talks about Jesus as the fullest revelation of God. And so what that means is what happened before was less than ideal, was not the way it was supposed to be. And if our understanding of God was incomplete through what had been revealed in the Old Testament, it's now most complete in Jesus. And so we have to read the Old Testament now in light of Jesus and not the other way around. So is it possible that in wrestling with their own history of times of victory in warfare and defeat in warfare, as they're writing down their history, they're imagining that the things that they felt like they had to do were God ordained, or that God is this warrior God, and that was a lot of the early, if you read the history of Judaism, you'll see that very early, way before the Bible texts are written down as we have them today, they really latched on to this idea that Yahweh is a warrior God. He is the one who gives us victory in battle. That was his primary function. That's because the world back then worked that way, right? And so what they did was they took the worldview that's what the gods are for. They're to give you victory in battle. And they just said, well, then that's what our God is for, right? And Jesus came along, and this shouldn't be controversial, right? Because we just read the Sermon on the Mount. You have heard it said, and then he quotes something from Scripture, but I say, he's correcting the Scriptures. He is not saying, oh, guys, it didn't mean that. He's saying, no, that's not it at all. That was, the revelation you received was incomplete. Now let me give you a more complete revelation of what God's heart is. So I would say that the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament aren't different. It's that we have a fuller revelation of what that God is like, and that God is like Jesus, who was the Prince of Peace. That is a controversial thing to say, because people doesn't maybe jibe with their way of understanding what the Scriptures are. But I think if the Old Testament was complete in and of itself and gave us everything we needed to know about God, we wouldn't need a New Testament or a Jesus, right? So I think that's the way that I approach that. And so now I read those texts in a different light. It's not all about good guys, bad guys. It's about the world was really messy, and as we're trying to make sense of it, we're trying to figure out whose side is God on. Jesus comes along to say, like, let's stop killing each other. How about that? Let's
Crazy
just get rid
idea.
of all that nonsense altogether.
Right.
So then, to fast forward that in church history, for the first nearly 400 years of the church, it was unacceptable for a Christian to participate in the military. The Emperor Constantine, who converted to Christianity, was not baptized until he was on his deathbed, because he was not allowed to be baptized because he was a military king, a military ruler. And that all changed once Christianity went from a religion of the people to the religion of power. And all of a sudden you have people who are willing to give their lives, martyrdom, for God. Now they have taken up this concept that we're going to kill on behalf of God. And so, they basically buy into the worldview that everybody bought into, which was, the people who rule are the ones who get to call the shots. And so if the good guys are ruling, then good things will happen. And they bought into that myth because that doesn't work. World history has shown again and again and again, it doesn't work, right? And they just slapped Jesus' name on it. And so, the craziest thing ever, in my mind, of church history is thinking of the Crusades, and they're literally waving flags, and they have with crosses on them, and they have shields with crosses on them, and they have a sword in their other hand. The cross is a symbol of sacrificial love, of sacrifice, of giving one's life away for the sake of others, not taking it. It's an oxymoron.
Yeah.
They can't go together, right? And then I mentioned this all the way, fast forward all the way to, let's just take World War II, for example. Now it's not Christians killing Muslims for control of the Holy Land like we had in the Crusades, which, bad, right? Now it's Christians killing other Christians for control of Europe, and you're like, how did we get this far from the teachings of Jesus that we think this is somehow just... And my whole kind of point with all of that was to say, we have accepted that this is the way it is. We've given up our imagination and our responsibility for peacemaking, and just said, well, I guess just how the world works, instead of saying, how about we just opt out of that? We don't participate in that way that the world works, and we show that there's a counter-narrative that can be lived out. It doesn't have to be this way. So, long story short, my personal conviction is one of Christian nonviolence, and I know that that's not a very popular position. Most people would kind of side with C.S. Lewis, like I mentioned on Sunday, with the just war theory. I have a real hard time finding where the just wars were, and even when the war meets the criteria of a just war, like I shared on Sunday, the only reason that Germany was able to get to the point it was because Christians signed up and said, yep, we're on this team. And so whether it was a just war for the rest of Europe to get involved to try to stop the Nazis, it never should have been possible in a Christian nation, a Lutheran majority nation. And so that's where I would say, if we just talk about this in terms of the responsibilities of nation states, I guess this is just the way it is, and sometimes people got to go to war. But we as the church don't have to accept that. We as the church don't have to just say, like, I guess that's the way it is. We can give the world a different imagination. And for, the earliest church history, that was what was happening. That was what was changing the world, and why millions came to Christ was because they saw a different kind of kingdom at work than what they saw in the Roman Empire. And then we gave up on that because... essentially, once it became the official religion of the Roman Empire, everybody was then Christian. Whether they were convinced that Jesus is Lord or not, it's like, well, this is the official religion, and it's going to go bad for me if I don't sign up, and then things dramatically changed. And so that was a very kind of roundabout way to come back all the way to the early church. But, the early church wasn't perfect. There's no ideal church, but... the people who spent time with Jesus and his apostles were convinced that the way of peace, even if it means harm will fall on me, is the way of Jesus. And I'd love to see a church movement that gets back to that.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing and sitting down and diving a little deeper into that topic. Yeah. If you want to hear more from Pastor Eric, we'll go ahead and add a banner to that message on Yahweh Shalom. Yeah. The Lord is peace. So thank you so much for joining us for this midweek mashup, and we have some more videos if you'd like to continue right here.